My name is Anat Admati, and I interview great visitors that sometimes come here under the label Power to Truth. And today I have Karen Howe here, who just 9 days ago came up with this book here, maybe, called Empire of AI, Dreams and Nightmares in Sam Altman's OpenAI. So people have by now heard about OpenAI, and many people heard about Sam Altman, and he's a main character in this story, and his company is the main company character in your book. But it's about this shiny word that now is all over everywhere, AI. And Power to Truth is really about. So welcome, Karen.
Thank you. And thank you for giving me your book.
Yeah, I have a book too that tries to explain things and change public discourse on a topic in banking. And now we're going to talk about AI, where obviously is where the debate is today, and a lot of action and a lot of battles over truth and politics and narratives and all of that. So Power to Truth is about trying to empower, give more power in the world to something called truth. It's a slippery concept, but what we mean by truth is a particular narrative that is grounded in reality, in facts, and that actually interprets those facts on the basis of the real world forces that that we should be discussing about the world. And so I want to ask you to just basically do some basic teaching about the truth around AI. Start maybe with the words and artificial intelligence, and then go to the technology a little bit, and then to the people and companies and power issues. And then we're going to get to the narratives. But first, start with the truth.
Okay. Yeah. So my book talks about OpenAI, but it also goes back in time to the history of the field of AI. And AI was founded as a field in 1956 at Dartmouth University. And this term, artificial intelligence, was originally coined by an assistant professor at Dartmouth called John McCarthy, specifically under the intent to attract more attention and funding to research he was already doing under a different name. And this was something he said himself. Decades later, he was doing these debates televised to the public, and he said, I invented the term artificial intelligence to get more money for a summer study.
So the word is very evocative, very exciting sounding.
Exactly, because it evokes this idea of intelligence, which sounds inherently good. We want more intelligence in the world, but one of the challenges of pegging a field to this concept of human intelligence is that there isn't actually scientific consensus around where human intelligence comes from. So to create a field whose mission is to recreate human intelligence is very slippery. Yeah. And so over the decades from 1956 all the way until present day, there have been lots and lots of debates about what should AI look like, what techniques should we use, how is this technology actually going to work, and who does it ultimately serve? And the argument that I make in the book is that the current dominant paradigm of AI development is one that really just serves Silicon Valley, its creators, and it's accruing enormous economic and political power to Silicon Valley under narratives that we'll talk about, where now, in order to fully grasp the sheer scale and magnitude of what these AI companies have become, I think we need to conceptualize these companies as new forms of empire. And that is ultimately the title of my book, Empire.
So they've gained power, and now people out there who are listening to this, whereas this debate was kind of in the sphere of almost science fiction for a while, it's become very much kind of in the day-to-day because people are accessing these these applications, the ChatGPTs and all the other companies, and asking them questions. And then, it's every day, and writing college essays, and then I can't write problem sets anymore, exams for doing at home. So that's the end of a lot of stuff that, as a teacher was, and what does it even mean to teach? Can people stop thinking? Just like they don't no longer know how to add and subtract because they have calculators in the cashier. Can they stop learning how to think or reason because somebody has reasons for them? So it raises all these issues with education, just for educators, but at all levels of education. But then the issue is just, what does it do to jobs, and what does it do to which jobs, and who benefits and who doesn't. So let's stay with the narratives now. So what are the narratives that gained all this power? It starts with the term artificial intelligence, and then it goes to, all the wonderful things it can do for us. What's the narratives that we're using to get to this place? What is actually true, et cetera?
I think the two dominant narratives in public discourse today is AI will bring us to utopia, or AI will kill everyone. And
doomers and boomers,
yes, and I call them the doomers and boomers. It's the colloquial term that a lot of people use now in Silicon Valley. And that's the public narrative, but it comes from the Silicon Valley narrative that doesn't just say AI, but specifically says artificial general intelligence, AGI. And I talk in the book about how there is this belief. So AI, we already said, was a marketing term. It was coined to be evocative and to attract funding and attention. AGI is playing the same role. AI became cheapened over time as a term because a lot of companies, public policymakers, they started using AI as a term to refer to many different things. And so OpenAI, then AGI had already been coined as a term, but OpenAI took that term to signify something greater, something greater. But ultimately, the definition of AGI is the same thing, this ultimate pinnacle of AI research, the recreation of human intelligence. And within Silicon Valley, these dominant narratives of the boomers and the doomers, this has become, both of them reach the same conclusion. Even if you're talking about utopia or dystopia, ultimately, both of these narratives paint the technology as supremely powerful, and therefore one that must be controlled very tightly by a small group of people. And it just so happens that the people that should be controlling the technology are the people espousing those narratives. Yes. And what I document in the book is the reality of what is happening with AI and the quest for AGI, how the technologies spinning out of that quest are actually affecting people in the world today. And I argue that the paradigm of AI development is very harmful today, where these companies like OpenAI are pursuing this scale at all costs approach to AI development that require enormous amounts of data to train enormous models using enormous supercomputers that use a lot of land, energy, water, and have also climate effects. And if we want to actually understand the impact that AI will have on currently and on the future and all of us, we shouldn't be wrapped up in these theoretical narratives about boomers versus doomers, but observing these harms and shoring them up so that we can get to a place where AI is more.
Yeah, so let's just, because there is sort of, this is technical and mysterious to most people, let's just say, okay, what are the resources that go into AI, data, these models, et cetera. What's in the black box?
Yeah. So this paradigm of AI development is based on so-called deep learning. And deep learning is this technique where you take software called neural networks that were originally inspired by the human brain, and you feed data, and the neural network does statistical computations that create a model, a representation, an abstraction of that data that then can be used to generate text, or can be used to make predictions or make classifications between different images and so on and so forth. And what OpenAI did early in its history was take this concept of deep learning and say, let's not just train it on small amounts of data. Let's train it on the whole internet.
Everything, yeah.
Basically all of the data out there in the world in the English language and a few other languages as well. Instead of training it on powerful laptops with one chip, a couple chips, or maybe at most a couple hundred chips, let's train it on 10,000 chips, an entire supercomputer, which was one of the most powerful supercomputers at the time. And let's not train it for a couple hours, let's train it for months on end, 24/7 around the clock. And there was a report from McKinsey that was saying that at the current pace at which this specific scale at all costs AI development is accelerating, we would need 2 to 6 times the entire energy demand of California to be added to the global grid in 5 years to keep up with that consumption.
So a ton of energy, ton of computer chips. And so, and then, occasionally some people
Yeah.
to do stuff around it.
Yeah.
And so, there's certain jobs to be done. There are certain jobs that it replaces. So what does it do to people? Then there's the environment. In other words, what's the impact of all of that?
Obviously, the environmental impacts become clear when we're talking about 2 to 6 times the energy demand of California on the global grid. Most of that energy has to be serviced by fossil fuels. And so there's a very, very clear climate crisis acceleration. There's also these data centers, they need fresh water to cool those data centers, and it's specifically fresh water and most often drinking water.
Wow.
And there was a recent Bloomberg story that talked about how this expansion of data centers is most of these data centers, 2/3 of these data centers are being built in water scarce areas.
Yes, like
So
the
it's,
Gulf.
yes. So it's not just the total amount of fresh water that we need to be worried about. It's the distribution of the data centers in certain communities that are already suffering from a lack of freshwater resources. There's also, as you mentioned, the human labor harms. And this is both the fact that these companies need to contract workers to do things like data annotation, data cleaning, content moderation work, such that these models that ultimately are trained and designed to say anything actually don't say everything. They don't say abusive speech, hate speech, toxic speech. And you need workers to do that work. And just like in the era of social media, workers who did content moderation became deeply traumatized.
Yeah.
They suffered PTSD.
On a floor, yeah.
Yeah. And so these AI companies are repeating those harms, and they purposely hide those harms
Right.
too,
So
because
there's sort of,
they want AI to
obscure-
feel like magic.
yeah, obscure some of these little facts that are
Yeah.
inconvenient.
Yeah.
Not talk about the resources that it takes, but just paint that future. So in terms of the narratives they're using, what they're saying, what they're not saying,
Yes.
that needs said,
Exactly.
is sort of some of what you're trying to,
Exactly. And they
to
choose their
describe.
language carefully. They talk about the cloud, right? So the cloud, it refers to actually the exact opposite. It's
Of
giant
a
industrial
bunch of air, yeah.
size metal containers that are
It's
pumped.
very physical.
Yeah, but of course, these terms evoke ethereal, floating in the sky,
Right.
nature.
Yeah.
And so AI is very much, as you rightly point out, it is such a narrative game. The vocabulary that they choose is very precise in how they want to convey and project certain values and certain ideas.
Emotions and sort of the sense that you get when you hear it. And then, the stuff that's not so convenient is just not in the conversation as much. And that's where, a book like this can start reminding people what's involved. I went to your talk earlier today in the Center for in the Human-Centered AI. Is one of those centers on campus that's incredibly well funded by tech companies, which of course is just like, a lot of sustainability discussions and other discussions in, all everywhere, including in academia, is all meant to sound great. And the donors feel great and they can be proud of these donations on their website and all of that. But there is a sense that, it is industry paid, and even, you know, the researchers that stayed in academia, and you discuss in the book how academics all get attracted to the work for these companies, so that depletes the academia. But even those that stay in academia know that they kind of depend on these companies for data and collaborations. And so they tend to also bring out all the wonderful potential of AI, and avoid talking about some of these other issues very much. So anyway, so I wanted to ask you about your impression of sort of, you know, the role of academic research. How does anybody, you know, judge that? And it sort of gets technical. And so, you know, how do you ever sort of sort that out?
Yeah, I see academic research and other types of non-corporate funded research. As you mentioned, some academic research is corporate funded, but I specifically see independently funded research as playing a really critical role in developing a nuanced public understanding of the impact that AI has and the limitations that it has. Because over the last 10 years, what we've seen, which I mentioned at Stanford High, is this shift of some of the top talent in the AI world shifting from academia to largely working for these corporations or being funded by these corporations. And that is leading to a distortion of science. It's as if all of climate science were done
By Exxon.
Exactly. That either climate scientists either worked for Exxon or were funded by Exxon. Obviously, you would end up with a very different picture of what the climate crisis is.
That's a dilemma
in
that
reality.
is faced by the sustainability school here, whether because their energy programs before the school came about were mostly funded by energy companies.
Yeah.
And now we enter the world of, you know, political narratives and governments. So empires, as, you know, you discussed today, and, you know, I'm very well aware of, were, you know, British Empire, but started with a private company. So there's sort of that symbiosis that you also discuss between governments and powerful corporations. And playing out right now, just seen on the recent trip of President Trump with Sam Altman to the Gulf, and the big contract to start a data center over there that we alluded to. And so what do you think about the sort of the narratives that are kind of political, or the political involvement of this AI, where, you know, Biden was in there and now Trump is in there, and we're going to just be the AI, you know,
superpower. Yeah, right. Yeah, I think the US government is currently really, what I said at the Stanford High event, the US government is really in its empire era right now, in the same way that I argue these companies from Silicon Valley are in their empire era right now, and each one sees the other as an asset to their own empire building ambitions. So Silicon Valley wants to use the US government to get their technologies deeper into the infrastructure of other countries. OpenAI just announced a couple of weeks ago this program, OpenAI for Countries, with the whole premise being that they want to be the hardware and software bedrock of other countries' AI development. And they are using the US government to help facilitate those connections.
And then, of course, they're going to say that China is the enemy, and it's
And
all
that is
about the race with China.
Exactly what they say. Yeah. In the announcement with OpenAI for Countries, they evoke this idea: you want to partner with us and have us lay your infrastructure, because that will give you democratic AI to counter authoritarian AI.
Yeah.
And the problem with this narrative is that nothing that OpenAI does is democratic. They don't actually develop these technologies with any kind of participation from the broader public.
Right. So it's a nice word, democracy. You know, again, it's misused. You know, we have the Democratic Republic of, you know, North Korea. So the word is used even by very, very non-democratic states, in the pretense of using the law, when the law is basically a tool of power versus, you know, a constraint. And we now start seeing it in the US as well. The rule by law versus the rule of law. So you see that the sort of what I call power and institutions in the global economy. Of course, I teach here. I'll rope you to come visit. Playing out. in other words, narratives in politics, narratives in markets, in the public discourse, and then, the truth and whether truth can emerge out of that, which is
Right.
sort of what we need to want, truth and then power.
Yes.
Will people understand the truth? Will they be able to speak? So you're saying you want grassroots. I think you said that at the noon talk today, that it's not top down, it's kind of bottom up. But I mean, the question is, does the bottom have a voice?
Right.
And can the bottom have a voice? How much does democracy allow the people who are impacted to realize how they're impacted and to actually get involved and be allowed in the room? And sometimes that's a challenge right there.
It is a challenge, and I think it is also possible to overcome that challenge in the sense that people do have a voice. They just have to remember that they have it. And one of the things that I write about in the book is about this group of Chilean water activists who you would assume they're at the bottom of the rung in the global power hierarchy. They live in the global South country. They live in a poor neighborhood within a global South country. And yet, when a Google data center came to their town to try and take their freshwater resources, they remembered that that freshwater was actually theirs. They owned it. They should be able to control the terms under which it gets accessed. And so they rejected what Google wanted to do, which was just use that freshwater without giving anything back to the community. And they escalated a fight from the community all the way to Google Chile, to Google Mountain View, ultimately to the Chilean government, and forced both company and federal government representatives to come to the table and listen to what the community wanted out of this kind of what the government kept trying to characterize as foreign direct investment and good opportunity. And all this stuff.
I think this is really important for audiences in the United States, because in the United States, there's so much going on in terms of telling people that, you want the headquarters of this company, or you want to give them all these tax break, and this is good for the community, where people have to be a little bit suspicious of some of these narratives, because will they actually benefit? Are they able to provide schools for all these people who are going to come? Are housing prices going to go up in the area? Exactly how it's going to play out when the mayor goes luring, an Amazon to come to town or whatever. So in general, just paying attention to the way you're impacted by things and to the narratives you're being told, as some people want to do certain things that impact you, to watch out that your interests are not somehow swept away in this. And I think here, there's, the narratives get away with, people not paying attention until it's sometimes too late. So I think that's kind of the lesson. If you want to give truth to power, you have to pay attention to get the truth. Look and check, and then speak, so that it has the power that it should have.
I want to highlight a story kind of related to that. There's another community that I spoke to that got a data center. Another data center. And it was in Arizona, and that Arizona city specifically believed in the beginning, they were one of the first to welcome data centers in, that if they welcomed in data centers, that it would eventually create high quality white collar jobs. Because if you allowed Apple to build a data center, that eventually Apple would open up an office where they would hire software workers. So the whole premise of allowing that investment in was this idea of co-location. They will then co-locate more high quality jobs in the data center with the data center. And it never materialized. And then that city ultimately banned all data center development. You cannot build data centers in that city anymore. And to your point, that people need to scrutinize the narratives and recognize when there are examples or case studies of what's actually happened, to pay attention to those.
That try to intervene appropriately. Before they learn the hard way.
Exactly. Before
what can happen when they kind of don't pay attention. So we need power of truth. I think we agree. Thank you, Karen.